I am going to talk you through the structure that at Litchit we advise you to use in the exam. As with any structure, there has to be some kind of flexibility, and so always consider the question that you are facing and whether this structure works. But we have designed it to be flexible so that it should work for most, if not all, questions. And you are using this structure: A, B, C. Answer, back it up, and challenge. So, as you know, on each exam paper, you will face some Part A questions, which are worth 2 marks, and they will ask you to define a word. Those Part A questions can only be based on those, I think there are 8 key terms for each part of the spec that you guys have on your title pages and on your PLCs. And so it's really important that you learn the meaning of those key terms and perhaps even have some ready-made definitions at hand. Because it's worth 2 marks, it's worth thinking to yourself, have I given 2 bits of information? Often, your second bit of information can be an example. So, for example, particularly on the themes paper, if it was asking you what is meant by human rights, your second bit of information could be an example of a human right. Or if you were asked to define the word sacrament on the Christian practices paper, you could give an example of a sacrament for your second mark. So they're Part A's. You have 2 minutes, but to be honest, you could probably do a Part A in 1 minute and bank some time for later on. Then there are the Part B questions, and these always begin with the word describe. And so you will be asked to describe something that religious people do or believe, or also to describe a term from the specification. So on the 2019 paper, for example, you had to describe Stephen Hawking's Big Bang Theory. So on the themes paper, you might be asked to describe the theory of evolution, or to describe Peter Singer's ideas about speciesism. And you want to basically give 5 pieces of relevant descriptive information. And you should include some key terms, and usually you should be able to include some sources of wisdom. And remember, sources of wisdom tend to be Bible passages, or for Hinduism from the Laws of Manu or the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas. But they can also be people, so Jesus or Gandhi. And they can also be your conscience or a set of rules, like the Catechism, for example. On the 2018 paper, there was a Part B question asking candidates to describe the crucifixion of Jesus. On this sort of question, you are just describing the story. You are not explaining the story. And so look out for those questions where you are asked to describe a story. You're just going to describe 5 things that happened during that story. The next type of question that you will face is a Part C question. And a Part C begins with the word explain. And you are going to be asked to explain why a religious belief or practice is important, or to explain a religious belief or attitude towards something. That's particularly common on the themes paper. From what we have seen so far on the religions paper, they tend to be phrased, explain why something is important. Here, your key terms and sources of wisdom are really, really important. And so the structure that we are advising is AB 4 times. So 4 sets of AB. And A is answer and B is back it up. And usually you are backing up your answer with a source of wisdom. And remember, you don't have to write out Bible passages, but what is important is that you explain how your source of wisdom supports the point that you are trying to make. It is not enough to just write out a passage but not make the link. But remember, a source of wisdom can also be a person or your conscience. On the themes paper, you need to give 2 views from 2 different religions or denominations. And so you're breaking your answer down into 2 sections basically. So 2 sets of A-B for each perspective. For that reason, it can sometimes feel like the part C's on the themes paper are easier to answer. On the religions paper, you're only answering from one religious perspective, and so you're giving 4 points, 4 Christian points, backed up by sources of wisdom. Sometimes, however, you can refer to different denominations, or you might contrast a literal and a non-literal understanding of text. You might contrast 2 different approaches to baptism on the practices paper, so infant baptism with believers baptism, or you might be contrasting Protestant and Roman Catholic ideas about the Eucharist. So they're your part C's. Then the biggest questions on your paper, and the ones that are worth about half of your marks, are your part D questions. And the part Ds will give you a statement to discuss, and you are expected to give supported arguments in order to reach a judgment on how convincing those arguments are that you present. And you should use key terms and sources of wisdom in that answer. A part D can sometimes feel like a 2 part C's sandwiched together with a counter argument and perhaps a conclusion tagged on the end. Don't underestimate the importance of using key terms, showing off subject knowledge, and using sources of wisdom. So we advise you to take the following structure. So to make your point, which is A, to back it up twice, which is B, and then to challenge that view and to back up your challenge. And so that is A, B, B, C, B. So you might have a statement that says marriage should be for life. On your answer might be, most Christians believe marriage should be for life. And then you would back that up twice, but then you would challenge it and back up the challenge. If you have time, you can add a conclusion. However, often the main purpose of your conclusion is to return to the statement and show that you're answering the question. And so if you run out of time, because you're often not adding new subject knowledge, it's better to move on to the next set of questions than add that conclusion. However, if you have time, they are a good way of showing that you are answering the question because you return to the wording of the statement. And so you might say, having looked at the evidence on both sides, I think that Christians should believe marriage is for life, and briefly give your reason. You do get spelling marks for the first part D question on papers 1 and 2. So your relationships question on the themes paper and the Christian beliefs question on the Christianity paper. And so it is worth spending a few minutes just checking your spelling, just to see that you can pick up as many of those 6 spag marks as possible, because they could tip you into the next grade boundary. And so to repeat, in a part D, you give your answer, back it up twice, challenge it, and back up your challenge if you can. You can only do this well twice, in my opinion, in 15 minutes. the PRE department sat down in a meeting and we tried to do 3 paragraphs in 15 minutes for Part D, and we just think it's impossible. So focus on having 2 arguments well supported with counter arguments. Another tip is that if you are able to take a passage and interpret it in more than one way, Eduqas love that. And so it might be, for example, taking a teaching of St. Paul that talks about women being silent in church and saying, therefore, we should not have women priests, but then making the point that St. Paul's letter was sent to a particular community, and maybe that particular community or church had an issue with a particularly vocal group of women, and so St. Paul was telling those women to be quiet. If you can interpret passages in more than one way, that's a really good skill to show. And also you're then using fewer Bible passages, so it takes less revision. In your part C's and D's, because you are building your case or, adding multiple bits of evidence to support what you're saying, Eduqas like to see linking terms. I would say this is particularly the case for Part D questions. So phrases like in addition, moreover, furthermore, consequently, in contrast, however, in the same manner. It is worth you, as soon as you sit down in your exam, writing 3 or 4 linking terms down and then using them over and over again. When the examiner marks your paper, they only see the current question or answer that they are marking. So they don't know that in every Part D you have used furthermore and consequently. So use them over and over again. Because in your Part Ds, you should be evaluating, you should be building an argument, talking about what is and is not convincing. These evaluative sentence starters are also handy to use. And again, at the start of your exam, write a few of them down and use them in each question. So phrases like, the key issue here is, on the other hand, this is not convincing because, a counter-argument to this is, a key strength or weakness. Alternatively, this argument is effective or is ineffective because. Again, you can use the same 2 or 3 on every single question. They won't know because they're just going to be marking. The examiner is just marking one of your Part Ds at a time. So to remind you, doing well on your Eduqas exam is as easy as A, B, C. In your Part B, 5 sets of A. Part C, 4 sets of A, B. And Part D, A, B, B, C, B twice, and if you have time, a conclusion. Lots of our candidates write this structure in the margin before they start to write, and they tick it off, or they write it at the top next to the question. You can do that, it doesn't matter, and it's probably a good use of 15-20 seconds.